What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
I did not open the family group chat first thing the way I used to, because I already knew what I would find there, which is to say a lot of noise about my sister's big hotel ballroom celebration, and not a single line with my name in it. And before you tell me to give them the benefit of the doubt, I'll tell you that I have done that for years. I have handed out so many benefits of the doubt that I could run a loyalty program, and it always ends the same way, with someone posting a picture of a cake the size of a tire for Emily and a caption about how she is the light of the family, while my birthday passes like a calendar typo no one wants to correct. I used to drop gentle hints, like adding my name to the monthly family dinner poll or asking if anyone wanted to do something small, and there would be a wave of agreeable talk followed by nothing. And I would end up buying a cupcake at a grocery store and telling myself I prefer it that way, which is a lie you tell yourself when you are tired of begging people who are supposed to love you to act like it without being prompted. The thing about families is they get very good at rewriting history in real time, so you start to wonder if you are the one keeping score when everyone else is just living their lives. But then you watch the way they rally for Emily. How they build an event out of thin air and a Pinterest board, how the aunts coordinate colors and the uncles haggle about liquor, and the cousins line up a playlist and a hashtag like they are launching a brand, and you realize it is not about forgetfulness, it is about priority, and you are not on the list. My mother says I am independent, which is a polite way of saying I do not require the kind of maintenance they enjoy giving Emily, and my father says I do not like a fuss, which is funny, because I have never once said that. I have only learned to stop asking for what keeps getting denied, because there is only so many times you can send your own party into the void before you start to feel like a telemarketer calling your own house. I watched them rent that ballroom with a kind of detached calm you get when the script is so familiar you can lip sync it, and I could already hear the speeches about how Emily works so hard and deserves everything. While I would sit at a table with people who would say they had been meaning to get together with me and that we should plan something soon, which is a phrase that means nothing, and I would nod and be gracious, because the alternative is to ruin the night for a sister who has done nothing worse than accept a level of attention that was always available and never offered to me. The part that still gets me, even after all this time, is the spin they put on it afterward, like my birthday somehow fell on a hectic week nobody could control, whereas Emily's landed on a perfect day that practically begged for a celebration. And who can fight fate, right? As if calendars rearrange themselves to flatter our favorites and punish the rest of us. So this year I did not wait for the inevitable, and I did not send hints, and I did not make a speech to a wall, because I am done using my voice like a doorbell no one plans to answer. Instead, I took all that energy, all that shaky, humiliated, trying to be reasonable energy, and I turned it toward something that felt like it belonged to me, which sounds grand, but was really just a late-night search that began out of boredom and turned into a plan, because while they were sharing screenshots of floral centerpieces and arguing about whether the DJ should take requests, I was looking at a list of places that do not need anyone's permission to feel special. I found a private island rental that offered a short hold with a deposit, and the description was not some fantasy brochure about bliss and sunsets. It was plain and almost boring, which I liked, because I was not chasing a movie moment, I was buying control. A pocket of time where no one could tell me I was too much or not enough or needed to be flexible for the good of the group. People always assume revenge is loud and messy, but the best kind is quiet and clean, the kind that does not beg for attention because it already owns it, and as I scrolled through the booking terms I felt something in my chest loosen, not a dramatic breakthrough. Just the feeling you get when you finally stop negotiating with a price that was never going to drop, and you decide to pay for what you actually want. I did the math in my head the way grown women do when no one is looking. I thought about what I could afford, what I was willing to trade, and what it would mean to reward myself instead of waiting for people who think love is a group project with me as the optional credit, and I realized that this was not even about a birthday. It was about refusing to keep taking the smallest slice, because I am good at swallowing it without choking. I did not tell a single soul, not even my closest friend who always says I should post a boundary and pin it, because I wanted to see what would happen if I did not announce or justify anything if I just acted. And when I opened the payment screen, I felt that old panic rise up. The one that says wait for permission and do not rock the boat and be grateful for whatever crumbs fall from the big plate. And I thought about how many times that voice has kept me in my seat while my name slid off the agenda, and I hit submit on the deposit, and it went through with the kind of finality that does not need approval. I closed the laptop and did not text, did not hint, did not leave my usual breadcrumb trail in the hope someone would pick it up and surprise me, because I am done auditioning for my own life. And as the group chat pinged with mocktails and menu tastings and speeches in Emily's honor, I finally understood the move I would make when the time was right, a move that would not involve a confrontation or a speech or a tearful scene in a doorway. And if you are wondering what that move is, let me just say that it will not be a conversation at all, and it will not be private either. If you have ever watched people you love pretend that patterns are accidents, you will understand the special kind of tired that settles in your bones when yet another round of excuses arrives dressed up as reasonable life things. Because in my family, there was always a project or a crisis or a timing issue that explained why my birthday slipped through the cracks while Emily's turned into a group performance with sign-up sheets and assigned roles, and after enough years of swallowing that with a smile, I felt something shift from disappointment into a steady, almost boring certainty that I was done petitioning for space in a room that clearly had reserved seating and my name was not on any card. I can list the rationalizations the way people can list old addresses, because they never change much. There was the year when my mother said work had been overwhelming and they would make it up to me. The year my father said we should keep it low-key because money was tight, and then later that same month he posted photos from Emily's catered dinner. The year the aunts said planning around the holidays was too complicated, and then somehow found a free weekend for Emily's winter gala. And through all of it, I kept telling myself to be gracious and mature and understanding until I realized I was confusing maturity with silence and understanding with erasing myself in advance to avoid the sting of being erased by them. The ballroom thing should not have surprised me, yet the care with which they handled every detail hit me like a slow punch that lands only after you pretend you did not see it coming, because it was never just a party. It was proof of where energy goes when people care, and they cared a lot when the subject was Emily, who is not a villain and who has never asked them to ignore me, but who benefits from a system everyone pretends is organic. And I am supposed to be the easy one who does not need the lifeguard because I can swim. That is how they frame it when I ask why the lifeguard never looks in my direction at all. I sat with that and noticed how it had become a kind of family choreography where I covered the unglamorous tasks, like driving extra chairs across town or picking up dessert or smoothing over last-minute vendor issues. And I realized that my helpfulness had turned into free labor that made their show look seamless, while teaching them that I did not need a show of my own. And the truth is that this quiet usefulness had become my seat at the table, which is a seat you can lose the minute you stop serving. So I stopped serving, which sounds small until you understand how much peace there is in refusing to be the emergency backup plan, and I let every question and ping in the planning chat pass by without volunteering. And when my mother called to ask if I could handle the door gifts since I had an eye for tasteful things, I said I could not take on anything this time, and left the silence alone until she said she understood in a tone that told me she did not, and I felt a small, clean click inside my chest that said keep going. That night, while their messages stacked up about song lists and photo booths, I opened my laptop and went back to the private island listing I had bookmarked, not because I needed a fantasy, but because I needed an action that did not require anyone's approval. And I read the terms again, the hold period, the deposit amount, the reschedule window, the cancellation penalties, and I felt the relief of concrete numbers and straightforward rules after years of family math where everything is flexible as long as it benefits the favorite. I did the unglamorous adult calculations in my head, looked at my savings, looked at the calendar, looked at the project schedules at work, and asked myself whether I was willing to trade a familiar ache for a new kind of risk. And the answer that rose up was steady enough to make my hands stop shaking, so I filled in my information and chose the weekend that overlapped with Emily's ballroom celebration. Not because I wanted to steal a spotlight, but because I wanted to stop lending mine to a stage where I was never invited, and with one long breath I sent the deposit and watched the confirmation arrive like a receipt for a decision I should have made years ago. I did not forward the email to anyone, I did not screenshot the confirmation, and I did not write a caption that tried to make the move sound inspirational. Because I am not interested in becoming the kind of person who packages pain as a lesson for public consumption. I am simply done waiting on a committee to validate my life. Then I opened the event invite for the ballroom and changed my RSVP from attending to unable to attend with no explanation and no follow-up call, because sometimes the most effective boundary is the absence of the usual performance. And I let the read receipts do the work I used to do with long, rational messages that tried to make everyone comfortable while I sat alone feeling like the crazy one. A cousin texted a breezy question about whether I was traveling, and I replied that I would be off the grid for a bit and hoped the night was wonderful, which landed like a stone in a pond and sent a ripple through the chat that I did not chase. And then I opened my work portal and submitted a block of paid time off that covered the island dates, adding a note for my manager that I would be unreachable, and I closed that tab with the calm that comes from removing yourself from a mess you used to clean. When it was all set, I drafted a single, short caption in my notes app that did not brag and did not explain and did not attack, just a simple line I could post when the moment arrived. And even though I did not hit publish, I could already feel the shape of the silence that would follow and then the storm that would come after the silence, which felt exactly right. And before I went to bed, I turned off notifications for the family group chat for the first time in years and put my phone face down, because the revenge I wanted was not a fight or a scene or a speech, it was a void where my labor used to be. In the morning they would notice the RSVP change, and by the weekend they would be scrambling to reassign the things I usually handled, and I would not be there to fix it. And before anyone could corner me into an explanation, I would take one more step that would make explanations unnecessary, because when I finally let the world see what I had done, it would not be through a phone call or a careful family meeting, it would be in a place where they could not control the narrative at all. When people talk about taking back control, they usually mean some kind of loud declaration or a family summit where everyone promises to do better and someone brings a store cake to make it feel official. But I have learned that real control is quieter and far more boring at first, because it looks like reading terms and conditions without flinching, comparing cancellation windows to airfare change fees, marking calendar blocks that cannot be guilt away, and building a plan that does not need applause to stand up straight. So after I sent the deposit and changed my RSVP, I moved into the stage that no one ever sees, which is the stage where you handle logistics until the shape of your decision is so solid it cannot be bent back into the old routine. I called the property manager with the kind of polite firmness I have learned from dealing with vendors at work, asked direct questions about transfers and check-in, and what counted as proof of arrival if reception was spotty, confirmed that my deposit locked the weekend and that additional guests could be added later if I decided to bring anyone. And when he tried to upsell me on extras, I declined, because this was not about upgrades, it was about making sure the basic bones were unshakable. And once the call ended, I felt the simple relief of having documentation that did not depend on anyone's mood. Travel is where people often slip and reveal a plan too soon, because they ask for rides or coverage or pet sitting, and then the whisper chain starts. So I chose routes that did not involve favors, booked a modest hotel near the small airport for the night before, scheduled a rideshare for an early morning departure, and prepaid what I could so there would be no last-minute calls that required explanations I did not intend to give, and I told my manager that a personal matter would keep me offline for several days with no availability for quick check-ins, then cleared my task list so no one felt abandoned. Because I did not want the story to be about irresponsibility when the truth was that I was being more responsible with my life than I had ever been. I looked at my accounts and set a ceiling on what I was willing to spend beyond the deposit, not because I was afraid of treating myself, but because I wanted to remember that this was not a performance purchase, it was a boundary purchase, which means it only works if the money serves me and not the image of me that other people will project onto it. There is a point in any plan where you decide whether you are playing defense or offense, and the old me would have stayed on defense by keeping everything private and hoping to feel satisfied in silence. But after years of being edited out in public, I wanted a public correction that did not require me to attack anyone, so I sat with the question of how to let them see without becoming the person who overshares for attention. and I landed on a version that felt clean, which was to post a small handful of photos that did not gloat and did not explain, paired with a caption that said nothing inflammatory and everything necessary, because there is a power in understatement when everyone expects a rant. I am not a fan of manufactured mystery, but I am a fan of letting people connect their own dots. So I decided I would show exactly 3 things and nothing more. One photo that made it undeniable where I was without giving away personal details. One cropped image of the booking confirmation, with sensitive lines blurred, but the words paid and confirmed intact, and one relaxed shot that read like real life rather than a brochure, because I wanted the reaction to be about the fact of my choice, not the aesthetics. Timing mattered more than clever wording, since the family tends to coordinate their energy around shared moments, and I knew from the group chat schedule that the ballroom toasts would start after the first round of appetizers, which put the sweet spot at the point where attention is high and phones are out for video, so I set my post to go live during that window, not to ruin anything but to stop participating in my own disappearance. And I hated how strategic that sounds even as I write it. Yet I also know that the only language some people respect is inconvenience, and I was done making sure my feelings never inconvenienced anybody. To reduce the odds of anyone accusing me of stealing photos from the internet the way people do when they are scrambling to dismiss you, I arranged for a quick check-in call with the island caretaker upon arrival, asked for a simple item with a date on it that I could include in the first photo if needed, and made a mental note to keep receipts accessible even though I had no intention of posting them, because proof is power only when it is held, not when it is screamed. I thought briefly about inviting a few cousins who have always treated me kindly, then decided against it after realizing that good people can be used as messengers by a system that benefits from softening you. And I wanted to remove any avenue for my plan to be diluted by well-meaning intermediaries who would ask me to keep the peace, so I put my phone in Do Not Disturb except for work and travel contacts and turned off read receipts across the board, which felt like taking my name off a volunteer sign-up sheet that I never actually signed. In a moment of pettiness I am not proud of but also do not regret, I updated my social settings so the post would be visible to everyone in my extended family network and their friends of friends, because the problem had never been a single person. It had been the chorus, and I wanted the chorus to hear itself. The night before I left I packed in a way that matched the plan, which is to say practical and quiet, set reminders for transfers, printed backup copies of confirmations. And then I opened the Notes app where I had drafted my caption and trimmed it down until it felt like a steady pulse rather than a scream. And I scheduled the post for the exact minute that the ballroom's MC would be tapping a microphone and welcoming everyone to celebrate my sister, not as a sabotage but as a refusal to keep titling my life around their date. And when the schedule confirmation popped up I experienced the strangest calm, the kind you only get when you know you will not be explaining yourself anymore. I closed the app, set my alarm, and made one final change that I knew would sting more than any speech or confrontation ever could, which was to remove myself silently from the small planning chat that usually spun up to fix last-minute crises. Because if they needed someone to run interference this time it would not be me, and if they wanted to know where I was they could look at the only place I intended to speak, which was a post already loaded and waiting to strike without a single extra word from my mouth. I woke before the alarms because my body has learned to get ready for impact without being told, and while the ballroom crowd was still stretching into their outfits and practicing toasts in their heads, I opened my notes, copied the quiet caption I had trimmed and rimmed until it read like a pulse instead of a scream, and set the post to go live at the exact minute the MC would be tapping the microphone to welcome everyone to the celebration. Not because I wanted to ruin anything but because I was done arranging my life around the parts where I vanish, and when the scheduler flipped to active I felt that clean hum of a switch being thrown in a room no one else knew existed. The first image was simple and undeniable without being flashy. The second was the cropped confirmation with the deposit line visible and the sensitive pieces blurred. And the third was the most ordinary photo I could find so no one could say I staged a brochure. And the caption was only a few plain words about taking some time to myself, no proclamations, no barbs, no hashtags, just the kind of sentence you can read without breathing hard, which I knew would bother the right people more than any speech. Because when you stop explaining, you stop feeding the machine that keeps you small. I put the phone down, turned it face up so I would not pretend I was above watching, and within the first stretch of minutes the little waves began to roll in, first from friends who know how to be happy for someone without turning it into a contest, then from cousins who orbit the family politics and wanted to be early in case the tide shifted, and finally from the relatives who always arrive like a committee, all kinds of punctuation and concern and surprise masquerading as warmth, the usual mixture of so proud and must be nice, and how did this happen without us? And even though I had prepared myself for noise, I still felt the jolt when I saw my mother's 3 dots appear and disappear like a siren in the rearview mirror. Because she is the queen of calling rather than typing, and the fact that she was trying to write told me she could feel the room watching. The messages split fast, the public comments that tried to nudge the narrative into wholesome territory, and the private messages that demanded context, and that old favorite explanation where I make it easy for everyone to save face. And as I watched the threads unfurl, I kept my fingers away from the keyboard, because the whole point was to let the picture speak and the silence do the rest. Predictably, Emily showed up with a sweetness that could cut glass, the kind that says this is so random and also so great for you, with a subtext of please applaud me for being generous about my sister's little getaway. And a few of her friends jumped in with suspicious questions that pretended to be logistical, like how far in advance something like this has to be booked and whether deposits are refundable and whether it was safe to travel alone. The kind of stuff people toss out when they are trying to catch you off guard without looking like they are trying, and I did what I had promised myself I would do, which was nothing, because the more you talk in that environment, the more you donate rope to people who know how to tie knots. What I had not factored in, and what turned out to be the gasoline, was my uncle with the unfortunate gift for saying what everyone else tries to imply, who wrote a single line that did not attack anyone by name and still landed like a verdict, something close to asking how it was that I had money and planning ability for this, while somehow nobody in the family had managed a cake for me last year or the year before. And I could almost hear the collective inhale from the ballroom, because he is not a subtle man, and he is not wrong either, and once it was written there was no taking it back or framing it as a misunderstanding. The comments that followed split like a road after a storm. Because there were the peacemakers asking everyone to be kind, and there were the loyalists insisting the timing was hurtful, and there were a few bold cousins who said out loud that maybe the timing only feels hurtful if you have built your peace on someone else's quiet. And my phone started buzzing with calls that I let slide, because I have already said everything I ever needed to say to these people and none of it landed, and I watched as one of the aunts tried to suggest the photos were old or borrowed, which would have been laughable if it were not so predictable, and that is when I did the only active thing I had planned for that day. A small move that felt like dropping a pebble in the right spot of a pond, because I replied not with a speech or a defense, but by adding a single frame to the post, a simple close crop of the booking confirmation with the date line visible in full words, which showed the exact week the deposit had been placed, the same week the ballroom invite went out, and I let that sit without a caption so there would be no handle for anyone to twist. The temperature changed in seconds, because suddenly the argument could not lean on the usual fog of memory and feelings, and while Emily tried to joke that I always loved dramatic reveals, the relatives were already peeling off into corners where they whisper and triangulate, and my parents moved to private messages with that earnest tone that always asks me to take responsibility for the reactions of other adults. And I stayed with the quiet because it was doing what it needed to do without my help, and within another handful of minutes I watched the family group chat light up with calls for a quick regroup, which used to be my cue to come patch the holes, and I did not go, because I had already picked my seat and it was not in their control room anymore. I could tell they were expecting me to blink, to add a softener, to say that of course I did not mean to overshadow, to offer some olive branch that looks like maturity and smells like capitulation, and I did none of it, because the point was not to win an argument, it was to stop playing the part they had written for me. And as the comments climbed into the hundreds and the ballroom toast stalled and my phone vibrated nonstop against the table, I opened the folder where I had saved one last piece that I had not planned to use unless forced, a screenshot that would quiet the last accusation about where the money came from and whether this was a stunt. and I hovered over the upload button long enough to decide whether I wanted to end it right there in front of everyone or save the final blow for the place where they have always demanded explanations. And in that hesitation, I realized exactly how to finish this in a way that would be cleaner than anything I had considered so far. Which is why I put the phone down without posting and walked toward the one move that would make all their calls and messages irrelevant in a single breath. When I put the phone down without adding that last screenshot and walked away from the comment fog that was already drifting into accusations and rescue attempts, I knew exactly what I wanted the ending to look like. Not a brawl in a thread or a shaky apology tour that lets everybody pretend this was just a misunderstanding, but a clean close that could stand on its own even if no one ever said the right words to me again. So I opened the family group chat for the first time that day, watched the stacked messages asking where I was and whether I realized how my timing was hurting feelings and whether I had considered what people might think of our family, and I typed a single, long message that did not aim for sympathy or debate. Just a straightforward account that said I would not be attending any family events for a while, that I wished them a great night, that I had booked time away and would be unreachable, and that I was stepping back from the role I had been playing for years. The quiet fixer and planner and extra pair of hands who never needed celebrating, and before I hit send I attached one file, a tidy document I had prepared in case anyone decided to rewrite the last few years in front of me again. A simple compilation of receipts and confirmations that showed how often I had funded deposits or covered vendors or purchased supplies while being told the budget was tight, each line dated and labeled, no commentary, no arrows, just facts. Because I wanted the conversation to begin where it should have always begun, which is with the truth on paper. The typing bubbles froze and blinked and froze again as if the chat itself was trying to reboot, and then came the predictable split, with one aunt insisting the numbers were taken out of context and a cousin saying he had not realized that my card, not the family fund, had taken care of the past decorations, and my mother writing me privately to say that I did not need to reduce everything to transactions, which is a line that always arrives when the ledger starts to work against the story. And I breathed through the old reflex to soften it, to say I did not mean to make anyone uncomfortable, to offer a quick walk back so the night could keep its shape. And I did none of that because the thing about boundaries is that they only exist if you can hold them in the exact moment you are invited to let them go. My sister jumped in with a public note about how family is not a scoreboard and how she loves me and wishes I were there to celebrate, and I could feel the room lifting her sentiment. The way it always does because people like a line they can share, and I responded with nothing more than a second file, the one I had hovered over during the post. A single image of a letter from my employer confirming a performance bonus and a payout that arrived the same week as the ballroom invitation, which answered the last remaining question they would use to discredit me. The idea that this was all some fake stunt for attention, or that I had tapped a mysterious sponsor, and then I turned off notifications entirely because I am no longer available to manage anybody else's reaction. The calls rolled to voicemail in a steady line that afternoon, some pleading and some scolding and a few slippery ones that dress control up as concern. And I let them stack without listening because I have already heard every version of those voices in my head for years, and there was nothing new they could tell me. So instead, I opened the island folder and did the one piece that would shift this from a symbolic stand to a real reordering of how I spend my time, which was to add 2 guests who had earned their seats in the simplest possible ways, the younger cousin who was brave enough to write in the comments that forgetting someone again and again is not an accident, and my oldest friend who never let me turn my own disappointment into a personality, and I booked their travel without fanfare and sent them 2 short notes that said pack light and do not post anything until we are back. Not because I wanted secrecy, but because I wanted to teach myself that I can hold joy without advertising it for validation or using it to bait the people who refuse to clap for me. The ballroom evening limped forward according to the photos that still made their way onto the feed despite the storm, and I did not hate my sister for enjoying her party. I simply removed my labor and my attention from the mechanism that had always made her comfort the default and my celebration optional. Before I left for the airport, I posted one follow-up line beneath my original images, a line I had drafted days earlier and kept in my notes because I knew the precise tone I wanted, something that neither sneers nor begs. And it said that comments were now off and that I would not be answering messages, that I hoped everyone enjoyed their weekend wherever they were, and that I was taking a year to invest my time and money in the people who show up without being asked, and then I toggled the comments to closed and locked my messages to friends only, not as a power move, but as a way of cutting the last cords that let them tug me back into the old dance. On the way to the gate, my father left a voicemail that sounded like a man wrestling with pride and habit, saying they had not realized, saying everyone gets busy, saying they would make it right when I got home. And I felt the familiar pull of wanting to give him an off-ramp, to make it easier for him to face his crowd without admitting anything, and I let the feeling pass because making it easier for them has always made it harder for me. What happened after that was not cinematic, and it did not need to be, because the win I wanted was never a speech that leaves everyone in tears. It was the quieter victory of walking into a life where my worth does not depend on whether my name is printed on a banner or remembered in a chat. So I boarded, I turned off the phone. And I let the air between us thicken without trying to thin it for their comfort, and when we landed I found a last text from my mother that did not exactly apologize. And did not exactly accuse, something in the old middle that asks me to meet her there, and I did not reply because the most final move I had was not a clapback or a reveal or a public shaming. It was a simple refusal to be available for the version of me they had come to expect, and if that sounds cold, then maybe you have not spent enough time promising people you will be easy to love if they can just remember to try. I did not burn the bridge because I do not need more smoke. I built a gate, and I kept the key, and if anyone wants to cross, they can learn the code the same way I learned it, through actions that match words and time that backs up sentiment, and while that may read to some as harsh, it is, to me, the most generous end I could offer. Because I did not ask them to change their night and I did not demand a crown or a cake. I simply took my life off their program and put it back on mine. And you can call that petty or dramatic or rude if you want, but the truth is simpler and heavier, which is that I won by refusing to argue and choosing to act. And if you heard even a little yes in your chest while I told you this, then you already know what kind of victory that is.